Greetings and welcome to Flanigan's Ecologic. I am your host, Ted Flanigan. And today I'm delighted to have Catherine Sands on the podcast. She's the director of Fertile Ground. She has been since 2001, an organization that she heads up that focuses on food system evaluations for schools and also community food projects. She's also a member of the UMass adjunct faculty focusing on food policy and food justice. So today we're talking food with Catherine Sands. Hey, Catherine, welcome to the podcast. It's great to see you.
Great to see you too, Ted. Thanks for having me on.
How are you today?
I'm doing well.
Good. And what are you working on today? I've already introduced you in Fertile Ground and your UMass professorship or adjunct faculty member status. But what's happening this week in your life, work life?
Well, this week in my life, I'm supporting a couple of different coalitions who are doing really incredible work on food access, healthy food access in this region. I'm in the Connecticut River Valley, and a lot of my work right now is in Springfield, Massachusetts. I'm also working with a coalition that's working on housing access and for everybody in Springfield. And I work with a group of farmers around the state and the buy local organizations that support them. So those are some of the things that I'm working on this week.
Well, let me just pick on the first one, like Springfield, Mass. How do you get access to food? Well, I guess this is just not access to food in general. This is access to good, healthy food, right?
That's right. Access to healthy food. Well, there is a real need for access to food in general too, actually. But what I'm talking about is getting healthy, fresh, local food in our food streams in Springfield. That may be with the food banks and the food pantries, but really most of my work, I cut my chops working in schools and improving school food and school meals. I just couldn't understand why we had lousy food in our schools. And so wanted to understand sort of the policies and the systems behind that, and then to support farmers and school food service to figure out how to strategize better and get together and serve better food. So that's one of the big pieces. And now I'm also working with an early care center that's got 500 families with tiny children, young families, trying to improve the food and for those kids too. So they're primed when they get into elementary school, already want to eat healthy, fresh food.
That's fantastic. Is it as simple as saying that food systems need to be localized?
We love food systems to be localized, but the funding for school food has always come from the federal government and reimbursement projects, and then comes through the states. One of the things that happened during COVID was that school meals became universally free. The federal government just said, let's make them free. Let's make sure every family can get access to them. And the school districts all scrambled and managed to get food and meals packaged up out to families while the schools were closed down. But then when kids started going back to schools, they continued to have universal free meals. And what that did was it enabled the school food directors to actually pool resources and consider buying from more local producers. And how to do that, and that sort of matchmaking that happens, there are organizations that are doing that around the state and around the country, and they've been doing it for a long time. And what we're facing right now is we've just had a big federal cut to the main source in the Farm Bill of funding over $1 billion that was going to local producers to get food into schools, hospitals, food pantries, into our institutions.
So when you talk about lousy food, and I think about institutional food, I think first off, I think of TV dinners, and then I think of early airline meals. But in general, why is the food lousy in the schools?
Well, every 5 years or so, there are new allocations for the Farm Bill. And our Farm Bill, which is a big piece of legislation that's basically our food bill in the country, determines what gets funded in terms of food. And most of the funding goes to big farms that are producing big crops like corn and soy. And very little of it is actually going to farmers that grow food.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's been a lot of work over the last couple of decades to get more funding into the National School Lunch Program so that schools can actually purchase from farmers at a price that the farmers can support, the farmers who are growing actual food in their region.
Yeah. Yeah. How did you start to focus on food? I know I want to talk a little bit about your earlier career, but let's focus on, we're into the food already.
Yeah.
How did you hone in on food systems in particular?
Yeah, so I was working in New York City at Natural Resources Defense Council, and I can talk to you about that later, but in an environmental organization. And my husband and I decided that we wanted to live out of the city, and we started looking to move out of the city and maybe commute in the 90s. And we kept looking farther and farther up the Hudson River and realized it was going to be a long commute. And we were both working in nonprofits, and that we didn't want to commute and leave our kids in one neighborhood. Like, we wanted to be where our kids were.
Sure.
So we looked up the Connecticut River Valley. We live in the woods west of Northampton, Amherst area. We moved. We just did a big move. I started consulting to NRDC. I had one child in my arms and another one on the way, and did that. And Jeff worked in mental health for a long time, and I worked for NRDC, and then started thinking about. I came across the Edible Schoolyard, Alice Waters' work in California, and then also the Center for Eco-Literacy, which was the think tank that was attached to that. And they were very kind, and they talked to me and said, basically you need a school and you need some funding and you need to just get going. And I thought, if they can do it out there, they can probably do it. We can probably do it here. So I went to our local elementary school and talked to the kindergarten teacher, who was from a farming family, a woman from a farming family of 5 women. And she was really interested in 2 things: the disconnect between kids understanding where food came from and why racism started so early on. And so we started talking about how there were lots of different groups living in this area in Western Massachusetts that didn't necessarily talk to each other. And we built this program, which we eventually called Fertile Ground, with the principal and with the teachers, where we built a garden and taught. The teachers basically decided what they wanted to plant in it, and then we developed curriculum with them. And we also collaborated with an urban farm youth program in Holyoke, Massachusetts. And the young people were learning how to grow food and also how to get the food to a farmer's market. And we went to them and said, would you be interested in teaching us how to do what you do in your community? And they said, we'll do it if you value the kids. So we paid stipends. We brought them up to Williamsburg, Massachusetts, to this tiny rural school. And they became the rock stars for these kids. These teenagers, largely Puerto Rican culture in Holyoke, and they became the rock stars for the kids in Williamsburg, and taught them how to plant a garden, created murals on the side of the building with them, hosted them for field trips to see their community gardens, and it became this amazing exchange. And lots of the teachers bought into it, and we were sort of on our way at that point. The idea being we didn't want to build a garden and then have a hole in the ground 2 years later that wasn't funded.
Sure. So you're not just focused on the food that kids are eating, you're really teaching them where food comes from and giving them an appreciation of gardening, farming. But then what happens in the middle of the winter? That all drops off, right?
So then there's different curriculum that happens. And yeah, obviously the big push of it is in the fall and the spring, and then families took care of the garden in the summertime. And by the way, it still exists. I mean, we started that garden in 2007. I'm no longer involved. The whole school took it over. So part of what I learned was you needed to get the infrastructure in the town for this. You needed to have a line item in the town budget or in the school budget so that it wouldn't go away, and that somebody could be there to support the teachers and the families to make it happen, because teachers don't have the time to make it happen on their own. They have the interest, but they don't have the time in what they have to do in our public schools. And so that was a big piece. And then getting the food service engaged in it was the next piece. And at that point, I went to graduate school because I realized I needed to understand the systems and the policies that framed who has access to healthy food and who doesn't, and why not.
Yeah. Now before we get there, let's go back to Alice Waters in Berkeley and the edible schoolyards. Just practically speaking, I imagine it's just a fraction of the food that they're actually growing in the gardens. Is that right? It's a
Yeah, that's right.
small fraction, but it's a very important piece. Of course.
That's right. So it's more about education and
Yeah.
hands-on learning. And that's what we were hearing from teachers who were saying, I've had no luck in getting this child, a child to feel comfortable, able to focus, and suddenly in the garden, they're able to really focus on a task. And so then I can take it back into the classroom and they've got that thread of information and they can start to build on their learning indoors as well. So that was about the learning piece, but then working with the food procurement was the next piece, the food service director, and what their challenges were. It wasn't that they didn't want to serve healthy, fresh food. It's that they didn't have the setup. Most of our school kitchens were dismantled during the Reagan era. And so even having the infrastructure to cook, to chop vegetables, has all had to been built back. And it's been built back and there's now funding for it at the federal and the state level, but the federal level has just been turned off, which is just devastating. But just to give you a sense, I went from doing that to working with the Springfield school district on building a culinary center. I wasn't building the culinary center. I was helping them convene a group of advisors to talk to them about what they were doing in, buying from local farms, how to network to buy local farms, which farms to go to get the food bank involved, the food policy council, which is like the glue that brings lots of different people together to strengthen the food system in Springfield, to get the urban farms together, to get the planners in the city together, all to figure out how do we source from more local farmers and more local vendors to scratch cook better food. So my job is like setting up these moments for people to come together and figure out some really difficult problem together across sectors, across age, across difference, across institutions. That's what
I imagine the food service directors, as much as they would like to be serving fresh vegetables to the students, that added a whole other layer to their job, right?
A whole other layer to their job, right? How do you make sure it stays fresh? How do you time it? How do you develop a relationship with a farmer? And then how do you plan for it? Menus go out a month in advance. How do you write that up on the menu? Then how are you going to be sure if the kids are going to eat it? So you have to do taste tests. That's why you want the garden or these opportunities for kids. It takes 8 to 12 times for a child to actually want to eat something new. They have to try it that many times. Really? So how do you build that into your model?
And would you say, this is just a broad question, would you say that kids like the food that they're growing at this point in general?
Absolutely. You watch a child grow a cherry tomato and then pick it and eat it and their face just lights up. Or pull a carrot from the ground that they've never seen grow that way. It's unbelievable.
So we talked about food service directors having to take on this additional challenge. Mm-hmm. And teachers taking on this additional challenge and people in the community taking on an additional challenge. But it's got to be incredibly rewarding when you see fresh food, on the tray, right?
Totally. It's amazing. It's unbelievable. I mean, I was just in Maine, in Portland, Maine, where they were in the schools, they were cooking halal food in the schools with fresh produce, and they were it's gotten to this way of actually being able to consider the cultures of the children in the communities and make sure that they're able to eat the food that they want to eat. It's quite unbelievable. And then also to see families get really involved.
And like you said, the families are in many cases taking over the gardens in the summertime, maintaining them throughout the summer.
There used to be someone who coordinates it, but in general, yes. And we used to do a big harvest festival every year, and each classroom would cook a different dish on hot plates, and from vegetables that they had grown. They were growing different things in different classrooms that had to do with their curriculum. So that's the other thing, is you have to tie this stuff to the curriculum so that the teachers can then report on doing the curriculum standards that they have to teach towards, which isn't hard. It's just, it's another step of work that's exciting, but also just it's challenging to teachers who have so much reporting they have to do.
Yeah, I can see that I'm getting a real appreciation of your work and the amount of time and effort you've done networking people together and sort of shoehorning things together so that it all works out. Now, you said at one point you decided you really need to go back and get your graduate degree at UMass and understanding more about food policy. talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so I needed to understand, just like all of us, is like, why is school food bad? Like, I wanted to understand the policies and the systems that made that happen. And so I, in my 40s with two children in my lap and running this startup Fertile Ground, I went back to graduate school at the School of Public Policy at UMass, and it was the best thing I could have done. I mean, not only was I welcomed in to teach in the Sustainable Food and Farming program, I taught a systems and policy class, food systems and food policy and food justice class, and helped design their systems and policy curriculum. And I taught that for 15 years. But I also really got to network and think about how policy happens, and what are the big P policies like the Farm Bill, and what are the small policies that are internal wellness policies at schools levels, and that determine change at a local level, and how do you influence those pieces, and who are the people to do that, and how do people make change happen?
For those of us that just eat food, this all sounds very, very complicated. Thank you for what you're doing. Let's talk about food justice. I guess I get it in general, but you can be more eloquent than I certainly on this topic.
Well, I think, I'll start with the fact that one of the things that has always been clear to me is I've had incredible privilege. I've been able to grow a garden if I want to grow a garden, and grow the food that I want to grow, and go and buy from my local farmers, and even to, I had a mother who loved to cook, and she cooked meals, and we all sat down and ate them. And all of these things matter in terms of wanting to and being able to want to grow food. And then I married a man who is a farmer at heart, or a true gardener, and so we do a ton of cooking. So who has access to do that? Some people don't even have kitchens. Some people live in hotels and have hot plates. They still like to cook. Some people don't have, many communities don't have grocery stores or transportation to get to a grocery store. And so what happens when you don't have transportation to get to a grocery store, or when farm produce at the farmer's market is too expensive for you? And there have been incredible supports that have been developed. Like, for instance, if you qualify for food stamps and you get your food stamps in Massachusetts, there's been a program called the Healthy Incentives Program. And that's a match. It used to be $40 to $80 per family a month for farmers markets and farm stands. You could go and get produce and get that credit put back on your EBT or your SNAP credit card. And the farmer would get the price point that they wanted. Amazing program. It got slashed this year. Hopefully our legislature is really working to build it back up in the state budget, because they realized that it was really benefiting the local farmers. They could expect to have this addition to their markets. And it was really benefiting families who wanted to serve fresh produce but couldn't afford it.
Yeah.
So those are the kinds of, so I was teaching my students about that. I spent a lot of time, I worked with this great program, the Sustainable Food and Farming program at UMass. A lot of people who wanted to change the world by growing healthy, pesticide-free food, and realizing how hard it was to farm. But they also really wanted to understand the institutions, the systems, the policies behind farming, to see if they really could make a go at it. And my job was really to teach them about all the other jobs they could have in the food system if it didn't work out to be a farmer. And I'd say I taught probably more than 400 students, and a handful of them are still farming, and they're amazing. But the others, many of them work in the food system, and I work with them all over New England. And they have jobs in food banks, and they have jobs in food policy councils. They have jobs in school food procurement or college procurement. They work for food policy councils, which are sort of the glue. They work for legislators. It's really interesting to see where you can go when you start with food.
Yeah, it really is. I'm going to take us a little bit off track and talk about supermarkets and all of the food that is wasted, all the produce that is wasted because it doesn't look as good, or it's reached a certain it's gotten a little bit older. But are you seeing more and more programs that are geared at sort of capturing some of that, the beneficial food that's still available?
Well, I'll tell you, I'll divert from the supermarkets. Yes, but I'll go to, there's an organization in Boston called Boston Area Gleaners, and they are they organize volunteers all over the metropolitan area to go and glean, which is basically after a farm has done its harvest, there's still vegetables on the ground or fruit on the trees that are the misshapen ones, or the ones that they're not going to harvest, but it's still perfectly good stuff. Yeah. And so volunteers go in, pick it up, package it, lightly process it, and it goes out to food banks and food pantries all over, as far as Connecticut, I think. I know on Martha's Vineyard, there's Island Garden Initiative has been doing the same thing. They've organized people to do a lot of gleaning and then to lightly process food in the school kitchens and then put it out in community meals or to the schools. So there are people all over the country that are doing this kind of work, because you're right, there is waste and it's perfectly good food. Again, this is the kind of innovation that has been funded. It's taken a long time to get it funded through our Farm Bill and through different programs. And those are really at risk or have been turned off for a while. Yeah,
that's so interesting. Sort of the low point in food policy must have been during the Reagan administration when ketchup was declared to be a vegetable. Explain that. Why was that? Why did that even take place?
Well, the main thing was that I think that schools basically dismantled the kitchens in schools, and they decided to centralize school food and make it as processed as possible, because that would be as cheap as possible. That meant the government had to invest as little as possible in it. It's taken decades to build up the infrastructure, the capital, to find the capital and the grants to build up the infrastructure for schools and school districts to rebuild and be able to cook again. Yeah. And so saying that ketchup was a vegetable meant, that they didn't have to actually serve vegetables, I guess. There are standards now that are different than that, but it's really, I really hope that all the work that's been done by so many farm to school organizations and the National Farm to School Network and the local regional networks will continue to be funded, because it's really moved. I've been in this for long enough that I've been able to see movement over time and real change in school districts that are doing these radical, fabulous things of changing menus and serving cultural foods and buying from farmers from all across the globe that have come to live in their areas. And let's hope that there are ways to keep these programs going.
I know in here in California, a lot, probably this is just what you're talking about. A lot of the cooking kitchens were dismantled, and now they have centralized kitchens with huge freezers and lots of processed foods, no doubt. And then warming kitchens, right? They send out all these trays, and then they're just warmed up at the local facility, right?
That's right. So rebuilding those local kitchens has been a hard thing, and there are people that are trying. Like in Springfield, they tried to it was actually Sodexo's kitchen with the Springfield Public Schools. They've tried to create a central kitchen that would actually scratch cook and then move it out because they don't have the infrastructure in all the kitchens, and they don't have the staff who can do the chopping, so people are trying new things to get back to actually cooking food.
And as you would say, I think that's just a piece of the equation. They're not getting the curriculum at that point. The kids are not out in the gardens contributing to the fresh food. Well, but at least they're getting some scratch cooking at the central kitchen.
That's right. But in Springfield, there's a garden in almost every school, and that's because they've funded that, and the Food Policy Council went in and put them all in and taught the teachers how to teach the kids, and then there's also an organization called Food Corps, which has placed people in service corps members. It's like AmeriCorps in school districts all over the country to support them, because you need another person. It's like it can't be left to the parents and the teachers. People change over, people have new requirements. So getting that other person in there really helps as well.
Yeah. So let me just drill into your business model a little bit. Let's just say I'm a school district somewhere in Texas or somewhere, and really haven't given too much thought to what you're talking about. And I don't really listen to people from Berkeley, California, typically. But some parent might have gotten interested, and the school administrator needs to look into that. So a school district could potentially reach out to you and say, Catherine, I'd like your organization to come in and do an evaluation of our food systems. Is that right?
Yes, and I could do that with them, and I'd also work with them specifically to think about the different components that need to be involved to change the system. So there are experts on procurement who I collaborate with, who really understand the nuts and bolts of how to buy from distributors and what the contracts are and the priorities are. But what I can do is get the people in the room to start talking about what they're dreaming about. Yeah. And to dream together, and then help them understand that they need to, in addition to procuring from farmers, right? They also need to make sure that their students are going to want to eat it, and so they've got to also invest in infrastructure building in terms of curriculum and relationships with teachers and with the janitors, and there's a waste issue, there's grounds, there's administration, all the people that've got to buy into it and how to build that out.
Right. And is that overwhelming to a lot of school districts?
Totally. They're just trying to get kids to come to school. They're trying to get kids to get through school, right? It's totally overwhelming. And they see the value, absolutely the value of it, and the engagement piece. Yeah.
Right. And what about integrating with other wellness activities? Does this mesh with phys ed and other aspects of health that can be taught on campuses?
Totally. And I've seen campuses that do the phys ed teachers are also the wellness teachers and the health teachers, so that they do like to get involved. I've seen I've seen people set up their gardens around areas where it's the playground. So kids are doing both. I've seen the phys ed students have projects in gardens. All school districts have to have a wellness policy, which needs to address health and wellness. And so school gardens have been a way for schools to address that as well, and communities to address that as well in those policies.
I want to ask you about the biggest successes and the biggest failures, or the biggest challenges. Let's start with the challenge. What have been the biggest challenges?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge right now is that it's taken 20 years to get some really decent funding in place at the federal level that then comes down through the states, and it's been turned off. Yeah. And so I'm not in conversations right now for the most part about what that's looking like on the ground in schools. So I'd say, the challenge has always been, if you change the food, how do you make sure the kids are going to eat it? It's that balance, and convincing the school food directors that they will eat it if you change it along with them. And if you ask the kids what they want, you can steer them, you can put some guardrails on it. But if you get them engaged in that process of learning how to cook something, or bringing a dish, or getting their parents or their abuela to come and do that and teach the food system, the culinary staff how to cook beans the way the kids actually want to eat them. Like, there are all sorts of projects that have brought in families to actually support the cooking process, so the kids will want to eat the food. So I'd say that's always a dance.
And I'm shifting towards the successes, but I'm guessing that a big one, you're alluding to this, the kids are taking this education home, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, all of a sudden they're asking their parents, what's in our kitchen, what's in our cabinet.
That's right. So again, if you live in a neighborhood where at the school suddenly you're being served, a nice a fresh peach, right? And you can't find a fresh peach in your corner store. Like, how does that parent, who of course would love to be able to give their kids a fresh peach at home, how does that parent continue this process of learning and discovery with food with their child? And that's where you get into really needing to think in a broader way about a food hub. Food hubs, there are lots of different definitions for them, but they're basically ways to figure out that distribution model. Like, how do you get the farm as direct as possible to the institution, whether it's the corner store or whether it's the hospital or whether it's the school. How do you make that happen in a way where maybe you've got a center that's aggregating the food and then moving it out to those institutions in one community? So I'm supporting conversations with the Springfield Food Policy Council again on those kinds of ideas, like who's already doing that and how can we build off of that in our region?
Right,
and
right.
Great examples of that around the country of food hubs that are really shining stars.
What would I want to give you a chance to say? What would you say have been your biggest successes?
I think I mean that first garden was a big success because it set a lot of people out on a path, and it impacted a lot of kids and families and teachers and changed a lot of lives. And I think that's sort of my criteria is how many leaders can I support in their growth. Teaching at UMass, I was able. Well, it was it was one of the many things I was doing for all those years. It was a way to really inspire and engage people who are already ready to go. And the same thing happens in my work right now. I'm lucky to have a small and mighty team, and to always bring in young graduate students and undergrad students who want to understand how to create change and how to document it and how to tell the stories of change and how to show the impact. So I think that's where I really draw great inspiration is building transformational leaders.
I think this conversation has really shown the complexity of integrating healthier foods into our diets, especially for our kids in schools. And it's also highlighted the incredible success and the incredible fulfillment that you've had by influencing leaders and by making these incremental changes. I want to just end up with asking you, what's in the garden today? Here we are in the spring in Massachusetts, in the Berkshires of Massachusetts. What's in your garden today?
Well, I want to say my garden is a lot of gardens, and I work really closely with Liz Ogilvie, who's the chair of the Springfield Food Policy Council, and also is the interim director at Gardening the Community in Springfield, which is an urban farm, and they're putting in gardens all over the place right now, so part of my garden is the young people there, and is Liz and her vision and her leadership, which touches people in the immediate community and in the Department of Agriculture and in the Senate and the House. I mean, she's everywhere, and so that supporting her to do this work is my garden right now as well. And everybody's putting in their greens right now. Everybody's down in Springfield. They're putting in their tomatoes, too wet and cold where I am right now, an hour away. But we've got a lot of good greens in the ground right now, which we're eating.
Catherine, thanks for what you've been doing, and thanks for your time this morning on the podcast. It's great to talk to you.
Thanks, Ted.
That's it. Thanks for listening to Flanigan's EcoLogic. We'll see you next time.